That's not how I wanted to start this intro. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 155 of At Odds with the Unbreakable Spirit.
And the executioner Daniel Travas.
I am Matthew Smith, aka the Unbreakable Spirit, currently coming at you live with COVID.
Yeah, they didn't need to know that. But anyway, today,
I'm explaining,
anyway,
I'm gonna be coughing a lot.
yeah,
Jerk.
anyway, today's episode is realism with live action adaptations of superheroes.
And basically, if realism in superheroes is necessary or not.
Alright, I'll go first. My honest, we're really shooting the
We're
head.
talking about this for 30 minutes, right?
Yes. Anyway, my honest opinion is I don't think realism when it comes to live action adaptations is honestly fucking necessary. Because if you rely too much on the realism, you ignore like 95% of the character's lore.
Yeah, and for the record, people, this topic was partially inspired by the TikToker the Panda Red.
Yeah,
Funny guy.
yeah, anyway.
Anyways,
What's your thoughts?
my thoughts are you're absolutely right. If you try to take a character too seriously or too realistically, you ignore most of what makes the character a character.
And the character that I'm just gonna explain on why it doesn't work, Batman.
If you want to do a character that it doesn't make sense for, I would actually say Superman.
Okay,
Because we
explain.
don't know if aliens actually exist.
Yeah, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. I feel like for Superman, you kind of need to blurry. You kind of need to be a little bit blurry for that.
Yeah.
But if you're taking a character like Bruce Wayne, like Batman, for example, you can't really do a realistic adaptation of the character because otherwise you ignore people like Mr. Freeze, people like Poison Ivy, people like Clayface, Ra's al Ghul.
Yeah.
Floor's yours.
Yeah, and it there definitely some of the characters you mentioned, but other characters that are out of the realm of reality are like Man Bat, Killer Croc. Like the fact that these are characters that people enjoy and have been brought to life in film and and TV and stuff for our enjoyment, that's what makes them great. But if you ground it in reality, it sort of taints the characters in a way because you have to change the lore of the character so it fits the universe that they're in.
Yeah, which honestly, don't get me wrong, that part makes complete sense to me. Changing a character for the lore of your universe, cool, great. But not important. But when it comes if you're doing a character like Killer Croc, for example, that dude's only been done in TV shows, in one movie, one TV show, twice. If you can take Killer Croc, but you don't make him realistic enough, it hurts the character. Because realistically, Killer Croc is a giant, tall, scary ass humanoid crocodile that will eat you.
Well, he's not really a humanoid crocodile. He has a skin condition.
Right. See, that you can make realistic, but it's like the like take what's the character's name? Like take Bane for example. You could take him, but you can't really what is there to make realistic about Bane? There's not. He's a drug addicted luchador. That's it.
Yeah. Who was born and raised in a prison,
That too.
serving his father's sentence.
That is also true. But my point is like, all right, look, if you like, uh, and I am gonna say this, and it may sound really crazy, is I know people aren't really a big fan of Zack Snyder, but at least Zack Snyder made room for Robin to exist.
Yeah, even though we didn't actually use him, we just saw a Robin suit that said, haha, joke's on you, Batman.
But still, at least he made Robin exist.
Yes. First time since Chris O'Donnell.
Which is like, okay, like, all right, if you're gonna take any character, Batman, Spider Man, Superman, you can't fully rely on realism because if you rely too much on what makes this character realistic is there's nothing realistic about it.
Yeah, with superheroes, you're meant to like just you're meant to let go of your sense of reality, to get lost in this fantastical world where men can fly and people can run faster than the dimensional barrier. But if you ground that in reality, you're limiting yourself in you being able to let it go for a little bit.
Like, okay, like take Bat, like again, I'm gonna use Batman here. It's like if you take the character of Batman and make him dark, and you can make Batman, Bruce Wayne, fine, cool. You can make Bruce Wayne a realistic person, but the shit that Batman does, no. Bruce Wayne, yeah, sure, totally fine with that. But making what Batman does a realistic character doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of a problem with the Matt Reeves The Batman that came out a couple years ago.
What you mean?
Not so much that was grounded in reality, it was more of like Batman was and Bruce were a little too similar.
Dark, brooding, and emo?
Yeah,
Because, look, if you're when you're doing when you're taking a character and you're trying to make it doesn't matter if they're Marvel, Marvel I get, sure, but if you're telling me you have a character, you want to make it realistic, any character, whether they're an original character, whether they're an actual character that exists in the lore of comic books, you can't just fall on reality. You got to just either, reality could exist a tiny bit, but other than that, forget it. Shouldn't exist.
yeah. Also, like, if you want to ground a character in reality, none of their feats that we see in the comics would be able to be translated to the big screen
Or small screen.
or small screen. Like, Superman wouldn't be able to hold up the globe of the Daily Planet. Batman wouldn't be able to beat the mutant leader or anything like that.
Because, okay, if you take, here's my problem with realism. Here's my real problem is if you say, oh, we can make this, we need to make this shit realistic as possible, and that is, Batman wouldn't, you're honestly gonna say that, oh, we want to make this shit realistic. most of the shit that Batman goes through on a weekly basis, he would have been dead. Period.
He would have been dead within one night.
But because he's a fictional character, because he does what he does, you can't just be like, oh, we need to make this realistic. You need to either have realism, just a tiny bit, or just forget about it, because otherwise characters like Vandal Savage can't exist.
Yeah. And he's a great example of how realism would ruin a character. Vandal Savage, for those who don't know or don't read DC Comics, is an immortal caveman who is multiple of the worst, most ruthless leaders throughout the history of mankind.
Yeah.
And he's able to be those people because, like I said, he's immortal. But the problem is, if Vandal Savage was to be a, let's say, a major villain for a live action movie, he you would have to find a way for someone like him to be beat. And that just seems hard to do if he's immortal.
Yeah. Like killing him at three separate points at the same time in three separate timelines.
And you
At the
see why
same
I
time.
stopped watching Legends unless it was leading up to a crossover.
But okay, look. When you're doing like something like time, like anything realism in comic books, whether it be like, oh, like you're taking like Green Arrow, trying to make him realistic. You're taking like Nightwing or Red Hood, and you're trying to make him realistic. You can't. You, in my honest opinion, if you're creating a universe, forget about realism. Just shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah. That was something that I don't think we took into account in the episode where we mapped out what we would do for a DCU.
Yeah. Because, like,
So
here's.
if we ever revisit that, we're gonna have to throw realism out the window.
Yes. Because here's my major point. If let's say you want to take. Let's say you want to take. Oh, I don't know. You want. What's a character from the lore of DC Comics? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Let's say you want to take. The Joker. Make him realistic. You kind of can, but the Joker would have been dead like years ago from all the shit he survives.
Yeah. And I feel like the most realistic the Joker has ever gotten is the Joker movie, not the one that came out recently, which isn't getting such stellar reviews. The one that came out before it, The Joker.
Yeah. You see, like, my problem with, like, taking a character, like, oh, you want to take, like, what's the word I'm looking for? You want to take a character like Black Adam, make him realistic. You can't. Shazam, realistic. You can't.
And part of it is because in reality, none of these scenarios would happen. A wizard would not give a 10-year-old boy the powers of 6 Greek gods.
That's comic books for you. That's
Yeah,
when you like. That's when reality should be like, yeah, forget it. Shit shouldn't
yeah,
exist.
reality should be like, I'm gonna step aside for this one, and you give this 10-year-old boy the powers of Solomon, Hercules, Achilles, Zeus, Atlas, and Mercury.
Yeah, okay. Here's another character. Like, all right, I'm gonna use Jason Todd as an example because I think Jason Todd is like a perfect example of why realism should have worked. Because you're gonna tell me this kid gets beat to death with the crowbar and then blown up. Kid comes back to life. Everyone's like, okay, cool.
And the way they did it, just it's literally a middle finger to reality when you think about it, considering Superboy Prime punched reality to bring Jason Todd back.
Yeah.
He broke literally the fabric of reality.
That's where I'm just like, you know what? It's comic books. See, that's where reality should take a backseat. Because reality,
Yeah.
Jason Todd would be dead.
And yeah,
Period.
it's more plausible the New 52 way where he was dunked in the Lazarus pit, which is made up of a material called dynesium, which has magical properties because it's comic books.
Yeah. Like, okay, here's another character that realistically that okay, like, let's say for example, I wanted to take what's the word? Oh yeah, Giganta. You can't really use her because a giant ass woman doesn't exist.
Well, there is like people can be born as like giants, but they're not like 20 stories tall. They're more like 8 feet.
Yeah. Like if you're
And
taking like
also,
a cat,
keep in mind, Giganta was originally a gorilla.
yeah, I'm aware. Like if you're gonna take like any character, whether they be Batman, whether they be Superman, is like okay, like if I'm building a universe with Batman or whatever, you can you know you'll ignore people like oh I don't know, Ra's al Ghul, people like Bane, people like well I mean you might ignore people like oh I don't know Poison Ivy. You might might make her a joke. Victor Freeze might make him a joke. When you have like certain villains like Clayface, a shape shifting piece of clay, where the hell does reality exist for that? It shouldn't. If you have like all these like fictional characters, you try to bring them down to our level on the big screen or small screen, you're hurting the character. Like you said, you are hurting the character's lore. It doesn't matter if you're fixing it for the universe. Like take Oswald Cobblepot and Penguin for example. That's a perfect example. You change the character's name to Oscop because, and I quote, that's not realistic.
Yep.
That's stupid.
Yep.
Like, take Edward Nigma from the Batman. You change his name to Edward Nasher because Edward Nigma.
It's too obvious.
Like, if you're gonna have like a fictional universe, be fictional.
Don't mind that.
If you're gonna have like, if you're gonna have a fictional universe, forget about reality. Put it on the back burner. But if you do reality, make it make sense in this fictional world. Don't just do reality for the fuck of doing reality. What's your take?
Sorry, I get that like there's some limitations to physics, but people, that's what CGI is for. To make you be able to do things that are not physically possible. And if you think like that's not been used in any comic book movies recently. So you want to explain to me when someone stuck their finger through your eye holes like Cassandra Nova and Deadpool and Wolverine?
Yeah. Like, okay, here's an example of a character where I'm just like, okay, realism shouldn't exist. What about the character? Like, okay, if you want to take like a character that'd be like, hey, this realism thing shouldn't exist. Oh, I don't know. How about um anything regarding Aquaman? What he does
Yeah,
shouldn't be possible. That's the point. Okay, look, and I get the fact, honestly, that that changing Superman, Superman arriving through a wormhole so he could grow up on Earth as an infant and then see the destruction of his home planet 27 years later. That shit makes logical sense. Doing that, that using reality for that makes complete sense.
yeah, because of the speed of light and all that.
That I totally understand completely. But if you just use reality because, oh, we want to use like, I don't know, we want to use like, we want to make the Riddler realistic. How? No, don't. You go ahead. Any thoughts?
Yeah, like I'm just thinking like how now you mentioned like we want to make Riddler realistic. It's just making me think how they would make other Batman villains, the lame ones, in fact, realistic.
Like who?
Condiment King.
Oh God. Yeah, because like if you have like you could like if you guys like have like a fictional universe, and I know I'm repeating myself here because because I don't really care. This is literally what I mean. If you guys have a universe, whether it be like trying to use realism for any of the DC characters, you just honestly shouldn't do it. Realism in DC comics, and I'm like Marvel, not so. I'm not really worried about Marvel's using real world logic for Marvel because Marvel
well,
makes it.
well, yeah, and most Marvel comics take place in a real world city, anyways.
Yeah, true. But like when DC does realism, when you take like anything like spot like Nightwing's the Flash, like you can't just make stuff realistic because oh we want things to be realistic. Like take anything like Nightwing or anybody with superpowers do. Anybody that has superpowers in the DC universe shouldn't be able to do it because that's not physically possible. It's
That's legitimately the point. It's why they're called superheroes. It's why they're called meta humans. They're supposed to do stuff that's physically impossible because they're a fictional character.
that's my that's a good point. Like okay, because and I'm honestly gonna stick to Batman here because Batman makes the most logical character to do this with. If you take Batman, you want to make him down to realistic. You ignore character. You ignore like 95% of Batman's look because the kind of that Batman deals with, some of his stuff that he deals with aren't realistic.
It is probably part of the reason that media is so scared to put Robin in a movie because it doesn't seem realistic for a caretaker or a guardian to let their 8 to 10-year-old ward or child go out at night and fight crime.
At least Bruce trains the kid.
Yeah,
He doesn't, oh, throw him up because, oh, he has superpowers. Like, at least Bruce trains you. At least Bruce trains the kid.
and like I'm gonna go. I can't believe I'm going back to the Burton era movies, but think about how old Dick Grayson was in that movie. He was
Yeah,
like late teens to early 20s. He didn't need to be adopted by Bruce.
fair enough. But if you guys look, like okay, Ado, like take what Tim Drake does because what he does isn't realistic. What happened, because I find out who Batman is. That's not realistic. Forget about realism. Forget it.
Yeah, and like the problem with like realism in movies, it doesn't just apply to superheroes. An example I just thought of is the Men in Black and that little like memory wiping machine thing.
True, but that's fair. Okay. If you guys are taking. Alright, I'm gonna use this character as my shoot to the point here. And I'll let you speak your piece in a bit. But you know what? You go first. If you have anything to say, floor is yours.
The fact that like, and this may tie back in, but to something we've covered previously, but I feel like the problem with realism in movies is the same problem of having darker and grittier versions of characters we love, like the Marvel Ultimates or the DC Absolute Universe.
What do you mean?
Like it's hard for me to formulate what I'm saying, but making a character dark and gritty doesn't make it better. Like Superman doesn't need to be dark and gritty. Wonder Woman doesn't need to be dark and gritty. Batman needs to be dark, but that doesn't mean he has to be gritty.
Nah.
And saying Batman needs to be dark is a stretch because it's also based on like what era of comics he's in. Like Adam West worked for his time because it was a campy era for comics. And like you can't blame the late great Adam West for that. You have to just realize that at in some medias Batman's gonna be campy and you can't change that.
Fair enough.
You got anything to say?
Alright, my last couple minutes of thoughts is you're right. It depends on the era of Batman that you're adapting for your universe, but it's just even if you make Batman a dark and gritty character, you gotta have room for the more silly aspects like, oh, I don't know, Man Bat or Ra's al Ghul or, you know, any of the other stuff that Batman deals with. Because if you
King
rely
Tut.
King Tut, Onomatopoeia, Wrath, if you rely too much on that, it being realistic, Batman being dark and gritty is all fine, but don't just have him be realistic for doing it. Make sure you use the characters that are silly, but you can still have Batman be both.
Yeah,
That's my last thoughts.
yeah, I agree with you. And with 15 seconds left, I suggest we wrap this up.
Okay, you go first.
My final thoughts are I'm gonna wait till after the timer goes off because it's gonna interrupt me. Realism should not be involved in comics or comic book movies because it'll take away the authenticity of it being related to comics in some way. Just the fact that you're trying to make it more realistic and more grounded in reality makes it less like the source material, and that's why we have people saying, that's why we have trolls on the internet who are like, do you not watch the TV shows? It's clearly like this. It's like, yeah, in that universe, but have you read a comic? Just because he's not able to do that on the show, at least at this moment, doesn't mean he won't be able to eventually.
My final thoughts are if you're taking any character, and I get, honestly, there's different versions, different adaptations, that there will continue to be different adaptations of a character, but it's just like, you can have a dark and realistic Batman, but I just don't like. I'm kind of getting like sick and tired of using the same old villains over and over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah,
Because
I think what you're saying is they need to do more like campy villains.
yeah, like hell, that's what I like about the Batman. I'm gonna be real with everybody for a second, because he's an actual like, oh, I can actually take this dude seriously. Because what you're doing, I can actually take you seriously. Because if you ignore, like, if you take the more campy characters but make them serious, cool, great. But if you just like, rely on the realism part, you're ignoring the character's lore. Like, if you ignore Robin, that's a major part of Batman's lore. All the Robins are. Hell, it's sad to say this, but the only live action Batman that's had more Robins than anybody else is the Titans version.
Yeah, and keep in mind, we're not gonna get another Robin in movies until like what 2027
Probably, yeah.
or whenever Batman the Brave and the Bold comes out because Damien's gonna be Robin in that.
Yeah. Oh, and all yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah,
Well,
so with that said, we'll be back next week where I still need to get in contact with Jesse to convert our intro into an MP3 single line.
bye.
Deuces.